This program has been brought to you thanks to the generous contributions of our patrons on Patreon. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. And for more content like this, be sure to check out the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon. Greetings and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Essentials of Practical Alchemy 2019, Mythology and Magic. Today in Essentials of Practical Alchemy, we're going to be talking about the cognitive thought form, how I developed this concept, how it differs from the concept of the thought form, and how to employ the cognitive thought form as your key to the Akashic record. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's begin.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
So how did I come upon or develop the idea of the cognitive thought form? Well, you might recall, way back in the day, those of you who've been hanging out with me on YouTube since 2015, I first started teaching Essentials of Practical Alchemy classes while working with my friend Dan Mills in his store, the Druid's Nook in downtown Olympia. While I was there, I was primarily working as a professional tarot consultant, and then that was like my base of operations, and then I also worked in many other stores and outlets, and pretty much anyone who wanted to get a reading, I was working just to perfect and hone my ability as a reader. And while I would while away the hours inside his store, I would take advantage of the fact that there were replicas of actual statuary that across many continents. He had like 5 continents represented, so you had the gods of the European continent, and you had the gods of the Mediterranean, of Africa, the Middle East, and you could walk around his store and basically pick up a statue that was a resin replica of whatever was being observed or worshipped in those areas by those communities. So I'm sitting here, and in fact it was this statue right here. This is Shiva, and Shiva's doing his little dance here. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this statue and contemplating it, and I'm like, okay, so here he's, and a lot of times when you break this stuff down, you just want to talk to yourself. Like you just literally want to verbalize what it is that you're looking at. And so I'm like, okay, I got this guy and his hair's all wild, and of course I'm thinking of the mythology and the dancing and the fact that when he got upset his hair got all wild and he was dancing. And I'm like, and he's dancing on this little person here, and this little person's kind of squished under his foot between a lotus flower, right, and his foot. And I'm sitting here looking at it, and I'm like, what am I looking at? I had reached this point where I'm like, okay, what am I looking at? And I kid you not, it was like a bell rang, and 3 words came into mind. I guess technically 4, and it was a cognitive thought form. Like just boom, bong, you are looking at a cognitive thought form. And I'm like, that's great. What's a cognitive thought form? And that's how that happens. That's how a lot of times when you're meditating, when you're working on a thing, and you're opening yourself up to whatever input might be coming in from the universe at large, it'll just come to you, and it'll be clear, a complete idea, but you may not necessarily understand that idea. This may become the literal start point of a huge exploration. And I advise you that when you are in meditation and these things do strike you, it's real simple. You'll have this clear, concise, that's what you're looking at. And then it's left to you to learn what you've just learned about. So that was me in 2015. And so I started working on it, and I began to consider what it is exactly that is a cognitive thought form. And that's what we're going to talk about next. To understand what a cognitive thought form is, it might be helpful to get a grasp on what a thought form is. Now, granted, I'm sure there are many of you out there who are experienced with the idea of using and manipulating thought forms. But for those of you who are new to this, a thought form is essentially the image that that is consolidated and takes form in your mind when you imagine a thing. So if I say a snowy owl, then in your mind, as I said that, your mind translates those words, which are complete abstractions, a vocalization, a sound grunt, right? Snowy owl. And reprocess that into something that is known or understood. And you see in your mind a white owl, right? You might even see a white owl in flight. You might see a white owl in flight over the snow. Maybe a white owl in flight over the snow pursuing a rabbit. Who knows how inventive your imagination is or how fertile it can be, but definitely, simply by discussing the snowy owl, you now have created and formed within your mind the image of that creature. In the same context, then, a thought form can be used in many, many ways and is employed in many ways today to teach all kinds of different things, to lead people to success. The very idea of The Secret, as written, is to create for yourself a bunch of thought forms. This is me on vacation. This is me in my new car. This is me in my new house. This is me 100 pounds lighter. Any one of those things, then, those images are thought forms which you then latch onto and you use to structure your thinking process, right? That's what the thought form is. It holds on to that as an idea of an ideal, perhaps. This is the quintessential example of the thing. And then you put it in your mind and it's always perfect. Even if it's not perfect, it is perfect in its imperfection. That's the quality of a thought form. A cognitive thought form is in fact entirely different. It relies upon the structure of a thought form, but for instance, Michelangelo's David. When Michelangelo was asked, how did you sculpt such an amazing thing? He said, all I did was remove the unnecessary marble, right? He just chipped away until he revealed what was inside the marble already. That image in his mind was the thought form that then his physical action of sculpting brought into physical reality. So he had within his mind an abstraction. This is how I see David. And then in his mind, as he kept that, he was able to form that and sculpt it into the statue that we all know, love, and appreciate today. In the same context, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, or any number of his inventions, could be considered thought forms, meaning that he had imagined them and then he did what was necessary to bring the abstraction into reality. A cognitive thought form is different. A cognitive thought form exists after the fact, meaning that someone has put together something and now they did it for a specific reason. The specific reason typically is associated with symbolic associations. In other words, the reason is that the person wants to exemplify a thing and communicate as completely and as fully as possible the idea that they understand. But instead of just a simple image, the concept carries with it a plethora of meanings. So a cognitive thought form is something, a series of symbols which are layered upon each other, layer after layer after layer, and until they literally are fleshed out in their composition and become a sculpture. A sculpture which is filled with symbolic meaning, filled with symbolic associations. Each little flame, the positionality of his hair, the position of his hands, his feet, his adornments, the fact he's wearing a sash, the earrings, the headdress, the decorations on his feet, the fact he's dancing on a little person, the fact the little person's squished. the way the little person is squished, all of those things layer and layer and layer and layer and layer upon himself, on each other, to create for you a cognitive thought form. So to really, really understand the difference is to understand what cognition means. Cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. Do you see the difference? A thought form is something you create within yourself that then can come outside of yourself, if you so desire. A cognitive thought form exists outside of you to be apprehended, to be grasped, to be wrestled with, to be acquired through the senses. And the result of this is perception, sensation, a notion perhaps, or even an intuition. These ephemeral qualities that are generated through the study and meditation of a cognitive thought form is what gives it its potency. Cognition is like ignition. It is the ignition in your car. It is the thing where you have the key and you slide it in and you turn it and it gets everything else going. That's what a cognitive thought form is designed to do. That is what all of the statuary, all of the paintings, all of the art, which is an honorific to a deity or a mythological figure or an astro-historical figure, all of this is designed to open for you a door within the Akashic record and allow you to explore it through your meditations. That's what a cognitive thought form is designed to do. So, when you wish to employ a cognitive thought form, what is required then is that you fill your bucket. And by that I mean that in order for you to fully appreciate a cognitive thought form, one then must be acquainted with, familiar with, adept with, fluent with, articulate with the nuance, the subtleties, and the explicit nature of certain symbols and their corresponding associations. When you are at that point, then when you're looking at a statue, when you're looking at a painting, it stops being static. It begins to dance. It begins to move, because as you're sitting there, your mind then says, I'm looking at this statue and it's a snapshot. It's a frozen image. But the truth is, it's like a slide or a frame in a movie. And so this is just a single frame, and that there will be an action that follows. That he's not just standing there with his foot out, that there will be another action. His hands will move differently. He'll spin, he'll turn, and your mind can then anticipate those actions. You can anticipate the value of those actions. When looking at a statue where the pose seems static and they're just kind of standing there with one hand up and one hand down, you can appreciate the depth and texture and composition of the statue more fully when you are more articulate with the meaning of certain things. And this is where Kabbalah comes into use. This is where a study of astrology or palmistry or the tarot, but in this case palmistry actually is a really big one, because when you're looking at hands and the way the statues might have the hands, you could perhaps gain a notion or an intuition as to what else might be communicated, because the position of the hands and what's being grasped and what's being held and which fingers are being employed to do that often can communicate to you an astro-historical association or an astro-historical idea relative to that figure and what they are and what they're presenting. So the cognitive thought form then functions for you as an alchemist and as a magician, as a student of the occult and the arcane, as the threshold of understanding, because it forces you to use your senses. It forces you to pick it up, to turn it around, and to look at it and to appreciate it for what it is in every possible way, in every direction. This is why my personal preference is sculpture over painting, because with sculpture you can actually get behind a thing. You can turn around and see what it looks like from behind or from the side, and that's really important, and because it allows you to literally appreciate the cognitive thought form that you are being presented with in 3 dimensions, and see how things develop, how things change, how they are important or less important when you have that in front of you. So, that's what a cognitive thought form is. That's how I develop the concept, and that is how you use it when you are working with things like statues, or later on when we pick up skulls and bones and we start talking about skulls and bones. You'll understand that the presentation of those skulls that we had last month that we're going to be using now, the presentation, what they're wearing, the eyes which are damaged or not damaged, all of that is designed to communicate to you something more than mere aesthetics. It's designed to communicate to you something significant, something complete, an idea that is full and has depth and measure and scope. That's what you're doing. All right. Well, I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this has been Essentials of Practical Alchemy 2019, Mythology and Magic. And today, we talked about the cognitive thought form. I'll be talking to you soon.